10 years ago, the Turkish army invaded Cyprus. The colonels who then ran Greece had just overthrown the Cypriot government in an attempt to annex the island. The invaders were welcomed by the Turkish Cypriots as protectors. But as they advanced, thousands of Greek Cypriots fled their homes before them. Now, the island is severed by a border its own people cannot cross. Last November, Greeks protested as the Turkish Cypriots formalized the partition of the island by proclaiming UDI. This, the first of two programs, describes how the conflict began 30 years ago, when the Greek Cypriots sought freedom from British rule.
For those years, after the war, as I look back on them, it seems to me that Cyprus was really an exceptionally happy place to live and work in. During the Middle Ages, Cyprus had been dubbed sweet land of Cyprus, and it was then, as it had been before, sweet land, until it was soured by political violence.
Τον κόσμο τον διδάσκαμε ότι η Εκκλησία ενδιαφέρεται για την ελευθερία του και υπέβαλε κατά έναν τρόπο στην κυβερνώσα δύναμη αυτών των πόθων. Και λέγαμε στο λαό, μείνε πιστός σε δύο πράγματα, στον Χριστό και την Ελλάδα.
The Greek Cypriots, led by their church, longed to be free of foreign rule. But they dreamed not of independence, but of union with their motherland, what they called enosis.
Enosis means the union of, it's the Greek word for the union of Cyprus with Greece. For the Greek Cypriots, it's something of the heart. We have exactly the same characteristics as the other Greek nation. We have the same language, the same religion, the same culture, the same civilization. We are therefore Greeks.
But the British would not give up the island to Greece. They thought Cyprus vital to their military needs in the Middle East. They found support from the Turkish Cypriots, the other 20% of the island's population, who, fearing domination by the Greeks, preferred to stick with British rule. And as Cyprus was more prosperous than Greece, the British could see no advantage for the Cypriots in enosis. The Cypriots did not deny the benefits the British had brought. They had established law, planted forests, covered the island with roads. But this was all beside the point. They wanted to join Greece. And in Cyprus, unlike other colonies, the British had not brought democracy.
Well, of course, the British rule here was autocratic, but a benevolent autocracy. We did the best we could for the island in the difficult circumstances in which we were placed. The system of administration had to be governed by the political impasse in the island, and the fact that the Greek Cypriots were not prepared to take part in self-government, representative self-government, meant that we really had no choice.
The British had offered Cyprus its own parliament in 1947. The Greek Cypriots would have nothing to do with it. They wanted only union with Greece. They were taught from childhood to desire Enosis. The British had left education in the hands of teachers from mainland Greece. This had proved a mistake.
I remember when I was a student, windows were closed so that they would not hear us from outside, and the teacher was teaching us the Greek national anthem. And while he was teaching us, tears were coming out, were running down from his eyes. And we were also very moved. This was the way we were brought up.
The British tried to stop the teaching of Enosis. They made it a crime. But the church found ways to get round the law.
Και είπα, αφού μαζεύτηκαν όλοι οι κοινότητες, απόψε κύριοι ήρθαμε στο χωριό σας για να κηρύξουμε την Επανάσταση. Ζήτω η Επανάσταση. Το επανέλαβα 2-3 φορές. Όλος ο λαός εχειροκροτούσε, εφώναζε. Η αστυνομία προχώρησε να εκτελέσει αυτό που με είχε στην αρχή απειλήσει, να με συλλάβει. Όταν επλησίασε, εγώ προσέθεσα. Ήρθαμε να κηρύξουμε την Επανάσταση ενάντια στην αμαρτία. Τότε πάγωσαν, σταμάτησαν και επεχώρησαν. Και εγώ μίλησα ενάντια στην αμαρτία. Βέβαια, στο τέλος ομιλίας μίλησα και εθνικά. Η αστυνομία όχι μόνο δεν προσήλθε να με συλλάβει, αλλά πρώτη εχειροκροτούσε.
In January 1950, in every Orthodox church in Cyprus, the congregation was presented with a petition for union with Greece. The church announced that this plebiscite showed 96% of Greek Cypriots were in favor of Enosis. The British took little notice of this plebiscite or its organizer, the newest bishop, Makarios. A few months later, Makarios was archbishop. At 37, leader of the Orthodox Church in Cyprus, the main power in Greek Cypriot life. He had taken the only way to advancement open to a poor peasant boy. At 13, he had joined the monks at Kiko, the most powerful monastery in Cyprus. All Makarios' predecessors had talked of Enosis, but Makarios was different. He was determined he would be the one to achieve it. He would consider no alternative and no delay. He transformed the Enosis movement into a major political force. The British could not understand how a priest came to be so involved in politics.
Well, the Archbishop of Cyprus is elected by the whole Greek people of the island in two capacities: to be both their religious and national leader.
He had political opponents too, the communists and a moderate party in the town of Limassol, who, though they wanted Enosis, did not believe Makarios' hard line was the right way to get it.
Makarios called us at the Limassol bishopric, and he tried to explain to us that we must not oppose union. We have explained that we were not opposing union, far from it, but that it was very difficult.
Makarios told me that we have to warn them. And I said, Your Beatitude, leave it to me. I will pass the message to them in a wonderful way. And I went to Limassol and I have organized a group of people who have approached some of these gentlemen from Limassol, and they warned them that you have to be careful because otherwise we have the intention of taking different steps if you do not listen to this first and last warning.
They were obliged to dissolve themselves. Because I think they were, perhaps, they were also frightened of their lives. That was the climate which existed at that time.
Makarios carried the campaign to Greece and persuaded his fellow Greeks to take up the cause. He still needed to overcome the caution of the Greek government, who were reluctant to offend their powerful ally Britain. But Makarios so roused the Greek people that he forced Prime Minister Papagos to raise the issue with Anthony Eden, the British Foreign Secretary.
Well, Anthony Eden had had this bad operation and had been recuperating in Greece. And at the end of his time, my husband thought it would be a good idea if he had a talk to Papagos. And so it was arranged in my husband's study in the embassy. And unfortunately, all went well until Papagos said, et maintenant, le Premier ministre, la question de Chypre. And Anthony Eden said, ah non, mon cher, on ne discute pas ça. And that, unfortunately, had a very bad effect, because Papagos felt he'd been rather told to go into the nursery, you know, and play with the children. And curious enough, from that moment, the things really went badly. It was terribly hard for us to make them understand that this was not anything personal, you know, that we were... It was very difficult at that moment to give away any more of the British Empire, and especially an important strategic post like Cyprus.
Just as Makarios was rallying Greek support for Enosis, Cyprus took on a new importance for the British. The main artery of the empire had long been the Suez Canal, where Britain had a base of 84,000 men. But in 1952, a group of young army officers led by Colonel Nasser seized power in Egypt and threatened to evict the British from the canal zone. So the chiefs of staff decided to move the Middle East headquarters to peaceful Cyprus. Here, unlike Egypt, Britain was sovereign and could not be thrown out by a hostile regime. Britain was then still a world power, with treaty obligations to help out allies in trouble. She needed a staging post to garrison troops in readiness for action. The large number of men involved meant Britain could not make do with merely a base in Cyprus.
And that is why the chiefs of staff held the view that in order to be in a position to fulfill those obligations, if we were required to do so, it was necessary to have the use of the whole of the island for military purposes, which meant sovereignty over the island. Self-determination, or any idea of Enosis, that is the union of the island of Cyprus, the kingdom of Greece, was out of the question from the British point of view.
Britain's new need for Cyprus conflicted with the Cypriots' desire to join Greece. But the matter remained a private family quarrel until the day before the House of Commons rose in July 1954. On that day, Henry Hopkinson, a junior minister in the Colonial Office, was to say one word which ended his ministerial career and brought Cyprus world prominence. The Labour opposition had begun to ask why the Cypriots, the most educated colonial people, had so little say in running their own affairs.
The opposition were insistent on some action being taken to advance the situation, and a lot of our own backbenchers were very worried. And all the more because all during this period, the talks were going forward for the removal of the British troops from Egypt. And that made our right-wingers, including, of course, the so-called Suez rebels who were fighting the withdrawal from Egypt, it made them even more nervous about Cyprus.
We were no longer prepared, the Conservative Party as a whole, to look at Cyprus as a little local difficulty, because it had assumed a quite new importance in view of our withdrawal from the zone.
The cabinet faced mutiny. 60 of their own backbenchers were threatening to defy the whip on the crucial Suez vote. This could bring down Winston Churchill's government. The cabinet's first concern was to assure the Tory rebels that though British troops were leaving Egypt, from Cyprus there would be no withdrawal.
And clearly, if they'd said anything weak about Cyprus, it would have created a panic in the Tory ranks, and they might have been in great trouble.
Henry Hopkinson's statement on Cyprus would be a tricky one to make.
Well, I made my statement in the House, and it went all right. Jim Griffiths, who had been Colonial Secretary of the Labour Party, got up and asked a few questions, which I answered quite simply and easily. And his fourth question was whether he could take it, that it was the intention that Cyprus should eventually attain what he called dominion status, with the right to determine their own future. And of course this put me in a great difficulty, because that was the one thing that I'd been told definitely by the Secretary of State when he returned from Cabinet that morning that I must not do. So I had to tread very carefully. I said there are certain territories which, owing to their particular circumstances, can never expect to be fully independent. Fully independent, I said.
After he had said never, the word that caused the trouble, Hopkinson said,
I think the right honourable gentleman will agree that there are some territories which cannot expect to be that. I'm not going as far as that this afternoon, but I have said that the question of the abrogation of British sovereignty cannot arise, that British sovereignty will remain.
But there it was, and no doubt it'll go down to history. Jim Callaghan's always quoting it. When anybody says never, he always quotes what Henry Hopkinson said in 1954.
The word never rang round all Britain's colonies. It enraged anti-imperialists everywhere. This was just what Makarios had been waiting for. The uproar compelled the Greek Prime Minister to give in to Makarios and to force Britain's hand by raising the issue at the United Nations.
He decided to go to the UN. And I don't blame him, he couldn't politically avoid it. Well, he couldn't avoid it because when a whole people believes that something is easy, especially when it believes that something is right, that a Greek island should be given to Greece. A government cannot resist forever, it can resist for some years. He can't say to the people, I'm right and you are all wrong, especially when they are right.
Makarios expected the United Nations to back him because it had taken a lead in the fight against colonialism. But he had to be careful. He could not simply ask for Cyprus to be given to Greece, for this would have seemed like exchanging one colonial master for another. Instead, he got Greece to ask for self-determination for the Cypriots, the right to decide their own future, confident that they would choose Enosis. But Britain managed to muster enough support to defeat the Greek resolution. Makarios' disappointment and anger were shared by the Greek Cypriots in Nicosia.
I was quite young. I saw the demonstration. I decided to follow the demonstrators. I started to throw stones at the police. I saw these demonstrations as the starting for the freedom.
A month earlier, in a remote corner of the island, a Cypriot had landed secretly. He came home to revolutionize the Enosis movement.
It had been said that the Cypriots did not really want their freedom, and that if they did want their freedom, they would seek it through actions of violence.
Colonel George Grivas was a Cypriot who had fought in the Greek army and led an extreme right-wing guerrilla group in Greece. He was consumed with zeal for Enosis.
An armed fight was the only way leading to the self-determination of my native country, Cyprus.
Ήταν πολύ έξυπνος και είχε τα μάτια του σπινθυροβόλα. Σε καθήλωνε. Όταν μιλούσες μαζί του, έβλεπες μπροστά σου ένα ηφαίστειο. Ηφαίστειον γεμάτον από την αγάπη προς την πατρίδα, αλλά και πιστός άνθρωπος, πολύ πιστός.
He took the name Digenis after a legendary Greek hero. He kept his real identity a mystery. While Cyprus resumed an outward calm, the last months of peace it was to know for many years, Grivas was forging a secret army, AOKA, the national organization of Cypriot fighters. He imported arms, hand-picked recruits, and selected his targets.
I was asleep in the hotel opposite the police station, and the Greek officer in charge of the police station rang me up saying, Mr. Denktash, all over Cyprus explosions are happening. Will you come to the police station? Well, I said, you must be a very nasty man to wake me up at this hour and to play on me the 1st of April Fool Days, you know, making jokes with me. He said, it's no joke, come down immediately, Mr. Denktash, for heaven's sake. And I went down, and there it was on the wireless from all over Cyprus, bombs here, bombs there, and they had started.
Everybody was talking in the morning, all groups here and there in the streets. Were reading the pamphlets which were circulated by Grivas that day.
If our rulers refuse to give us back our freedom, we shall claim it with our own hands and with our own blood. AOKA, the leader, Digenis.
And talking about the explosions, there was another atmosphere, really.
I felt just that I had to do it. I had to fight for the freedom of my country. It was a strong feeling, really. I couldn't be out.
What you need to be a member of this organization was that you must be, at that time, a right wing, belong to right-wing party. I mean, right-wing, you are all except the leftists, the communists. I mean, they check your character. I mean, let's say if you were going around in bars, drinking or having affairs with people that didn't, I mean, have a good name, they wouldn't choose you to be a member of the organization. You must have a good character.
Ήταν παιδιά που εξομολογούνται τακτικά, εκκοινωνούσαν τακτικά. Και το Μυρμήγκι να το σκοτώσουν δεν το ήθελα. Όταν όμως εκλήθησαν στον αγώνα, φυσικά έκαναν το καθήκον τους και έγραψαν την ωραιότερη σελίδα της ιστορίας της Κύπρου. Έχω ορκίσει πάρα πολλούς νέους.
I swear in the name of the Holy Trinity that I shall work with all my power for the liberation of Cyprus from the British yoke, sacrificing for this even my life. You have to take a Bible and put your hand on it and take the oath. You keep your secret. You tell nothing to anybody, not to your parents, not to your relatives, not to anybody.
If you betrayed your friends, you are a traitor. And it was very difficult for somebody who betrayed his country.
They will kill you, or, I mean, you could not come out of that.
To their parents, AOKA's secret recruits were still just children.
I had a problem with my relatives, more with my father, that he thought that I was a moral person, moral girl, because I used to go out with men. And after I asked my leader of my district to break the oath and say to my father that I fight for my country and not just to amuse myself. And when I told him, he was so glad and moved that he gave me his blessing, but he lost his sleep.
I shall perform without question all the orders of the organization, however difficult or dangerous this may be.
They ordered me to execute to execute a Greek Cypriot. In the main road, a very busy road. And believe me, I pissed drop by drop in my underwear, because it was the first time I had a pistol. Very soon he arrived. I aim, I fire twice. For a long time I saw this person in my dreams, even when I didn't sleep, I saw his face in front of me. Well, it was the first experience anyway. But later you get used to, you can say that after a lot of training and after some more killings, you get used to killing.
The British looked to Archbishop Makarios to put the moral weight of the church behind their battle against Aoka terrorism. They tried to pin him down.
I am opposed to the use of violence, but at the same time, I am opposed to the British policy which has provoked violence. However, I don't think wise to condemn violence in public, because I understand that a Greek section of the people is in favor of this method.
The British were baffled by the failure of this man of God to condemn violence. They didn't realize he was Aoka's founder and its commander-in-chief.
Yes, Makarios, on his way to the United Nations, while we have had this meeting with Grivas in Athens, gave him the green light to come to Cyprus and gave him money to pay the transportation. But he told him that you go there, you continue organizing things, but you will not start unless you receive an order from me. He did not want a revolution with battles and guns and machine guns and submachine guns. He was thinking of an explosion here, a demonstration there, some shooting to help or escape. Well, this is the ideas he was having by that time. Of course, the other man was having, Grivas was having completely different ideas.
We had a meeting at the yard of Kiko Monastery outside Nicosia. And Makarios started talking to me about the struggle. And he said, well, I hope that having this struggle, we shall raise the international interest and we can come to talks with the British, who until now they refused to talk with us. The abbot, who was Abbot Chrysostomus, he was sitting away and he approached us and with a cunning smile he said, well, I know. What about you are talking so many hours? Well, it's easy to start, but it's very difficult to stop, he said.
By the summer of 1955, Makarios' plan was succeeding. Aoka sabotage had attracted world attention to the Greek Cypriots' cause. The British feared that this year the Greeks would win the United Nations vote. They turned for support to the other country opposed to Enosis, Turkey, just visible 40 miles from the island.
If the island became Greek, it would constitute a strategic disadvantage for us. As you look at the map, you can see that the island is like a dagger pointed at the soft belly, underbelly of Turkey. And this ideal of Enosis union with Greece was, of course, anathema to us.
All the other islands off Turkey's shores were already Greek. Turkey did not want Cyprus to go the same way. But the Turkish government had not yet said so in public.
The first time I was directly involved with this was when Michael Stewart, who was, I think, chargé d'affaires of the British Embassy at the time, called on me at the Foreign Ministry, and he pointed out to the fact that this question of Cyprus was getting out of hand. The big movement for Enosis, union with Greece, and what was Turkey going to do about it? Well, acting upon instructions, I told him that we relied completely on the sagacity of the British administration to control the situation. This was an internal problem of the United Kingdom, of the British Empire, as a matter of fact, at the time. And we relied on them to safeguard the life and property of the Turkish community. I think he was rather surprised at this. And I think the British government hoped that the Turks would take an interest in this to form sort of a balance.
We had reached a situation in which we had to get off the hook. Too many people in the world were running off with the impression that here were the stuffy British simply trying to hang on to a colony which desperately wanted independence. And here were we, horrible imperialists, who were denying these people their freedom. Goaded by myself, Harold Macmillan persuaded Ed Needham to let him call the Greek and Turkish governments to a conference.
At the conference, the Turks were forced to speak out against the Greek demand for Enosis. Britain thus demonstrated that giving in to Makarios would provoke Turkey. Now, she had a respectable reason to stay in Cyprus.
I am afraid all the complications in the present deadlock mainly derive from the wrong policy which the British government has so far followed on the question of Cyprus, and particularly in artificially setting up Turkey as an interested party with the object of countering Cypriot self-determination.
I don't think this was our doing necessarily. We leaned on the Turks, we used the Turks, but I don't think we hotted them up.
There has never been a time when British sovereignty over Cyprus was more vital than in the present day. The fears and anxieties of Turkey are constantly forgotten. Turkey that ruled Cyprus for 300 years. Turkey that is only 40 miles away from the shores of Cyprus.
Back in Cyprus, Aoka was beginning to show its muscle. Its first target was the police.
To the police. Do not try to block our path, or you will stain it with your blood. Anyone who tries to arrest or search Cypriot patriots will be shot. Aoka. The leader, Digenis.
On the 1st of April, everyone looked upon this movement as the movement of misguided few under the guidance of the church, and even Greek police. There were very good CID men in the police force, excellent people, who looked upon it as just a criminal activity by misguided youth. And they were very effective in catching these people. But the terrorism towards informers, towards the police who followed them, was such that within 6 months, I know the people who were saying this is the criminal activity of a misguided few were saying we are Aoka too. And they looked upon it as a national activity, and no one dared to give information against them or to follow them.
As Aoka's grip tightened on the Greek Cypriots, Britain's control over Cyprus fell apart. Bombs went off all over the island. Policemen leaked the government's anti-terrorist plans to Aoka. Greek Cypriot customs men helped Aoka slip arms into the island. Greek schools operated as Aoka training grounds. A student mob took control of Nicosia and burned the British Institute. A mass breakout of Aoka suspects from Kyrenia Castle was the last straw. The government turned to its top soldier, Field Marshal Sir John Harding, Chief of the Imperial General Staff. Greece and Cyprus expected the worst.
The
John, the Greek Foreign Minister said this morning that your appointment meant that Britain was going to war with Cyprus. Would you say that that was an exaggeration?
Oh, I'm very sorry that he's taken up that attitude, because as far as I'm concerned, there's no question of war at all. In fact, I believe that the sooner people settle down peacefully and quietly together, the sooner we can get a proper answer to this business.
The soldiers' first move was not to launch all-out war, but to invite the Archbishop to talks. What was Harding's purpose?
To get him, first of all, to denounce the use of violence for political ends, which I thought he ought to do as a man, a high-ranking man, a spiritual leader, and to enter into negotiations for an advance towards self-government.
Harding's strategy was simple. If he could induce the Archbishop to denounce Eocha's violence, Eocha's support would fall away, and he would avoid further bloodshed. But the British Field Marshal didn't realize that he faced Eocha's commander-in-chief. Makarios wanted to find out what concessions his campaign of violence had won.
The Archbishop believed that the British, immediately after the starting of that campaign, could come and talk with us. And really they came.
My impression is that the new governor, Field Marshal Sir John Harding, is an intelligent and straightforward man. This is the reason I believe that he will suggest to his government to recognize the right of Cyprus people to self-determination for Britain's prestige and the pacification of this area.
Makarios came to the next meeting with an idea he thought would make it easier for Harding to recognize his people's right. He would be prepared to concede he couldn't have self-determination just yet. He'd agree to wait for Enosis. He would accept the self-government Harding was urging on him, a parliament with Cypriot ministers under the governor. In return, Harding must give a clear promise that this would be a first step towards self-determination.
I was impressed by him very much. He met me very agreeably. I thought I could probably do business with him.
But Harding's orders, like Hopkinson's a year before, were that self-determination could never be discussed. So he went to London to tell the cabinet that the Archbishop had made a big concession and that they too must compromise, or a bloodbath would be unavoidable.
Harding made it clear that unless he could discuss self-determination with Makarios, that there was absolutely no point in having a discussion at all. And so this was agreed, that the question of self-determination could be raised and could be debated in the discussions between Makarios and Harding, which was a concession, of course, on the part of the British government.
The government authorized Harding to return to Cyprus with a carefully framed new policy.
The governor came middle of November from London with new instructions. And we met in our house in Nicosia the 21st of November, 1955. I remember that day, Marshal Harding came first, 10 minutes earlier, maybe for security reasons. And Makarios came a few minutes later. And immediately, Marshal Harding took over from his pocket a paper. He gave it to Makarios and he said, "Your Beatitude, I have very good news for you."
On the paper was a formula stating a new British position on self-determination. It is not our position that the principle of self-determination can never be applicable to Cyprus. It is our position that it is not now a practical proposition on account of the present situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. This became known as the double negative. In simple words, it meant enosis not never, but not now.
Yes, this was really an attempt to clarify the government's position in regard to self-determination and to perhaps open the door a crack to Makarios as a bait to induce him to proceed with negotiations for a constitutional self-government.
The Archbishop said, Your Excellency, I cannot accept this. And Harding he was very disappointed. He left immediately, without waiting even to have the sweets and the coffee we usually offered in Cyprus in such occasions, you know. And I read the paper, and I was really surprised, because it was the first time the British government recognized the right of self-determination to the people of Cyprus. When Marshal Harding left, the Archbishop told me, well, that we have in our pocket. And we must try now to make it better.
Makarios was playing a dangerous game. The weeks passed. Britain made no better offer. Harding prepared his military machine. Aoka stepped up its violence. But the Americans, worried by this rift between their allies, broke the stalemate. They persuaded the new British Prime Minister, Sir Anthony Eden, to give the Archbishop another chance, if the Greek government could coax him back to the bargaining table. The new Greek Prime Minister, Konstantin Karamanlis, felt that Cyprus had to be settled fast, and that Britain's double negative opened up a real opportunity.
Karamanlis understood immediately that that was a hope. It was something tangible. And he sent immediately somebody to Cyprus, Ambassador Iliadis, to see him privately and to convince him.
Makarios was warned that if he did not talk to Harding, he could be facing the Turks. He went back to talk to Harding.
Though latest reports give hope of a settlement in Cyprus, tension in that troubled island is as high as ever. Field Marshal Sir John Harding, Governor of Cyprus, newly returned from London, has his 7th and most crucial meeting with Archbishop Makarios, leader of the island's demand for union with Greece. But as they discuss the British government's latest proposals, fresh rioting breaks out in Nicosia. From their school roof, Cypriot students rain stones on patrols of the South Staffordshire Regiment in the street below.
Harding's patience was wearing thin as he presented the cabinet's final formula to Makarios.
He made what seemed to me an eloquent, even moving personal appeal to the Archbishop to give his people a lead away from violence. Even the Archbishop seemed to me to be impressed, but after a short pause he said, you must understand, Sir John, that I cannot lead my people where they will not go. And the Field Marshal, in exasperation, turned to me and said under his breath, funny sort of leadership to my way of thinking.
Instead of the straight answer Harding was expecting, Makarios asked for time to meet his council. Since the British arrived in 1878, the Church had held firm to one policy: enosis now and no compromise. The Archbishop, however, persuaded the council that to accept Harding's offer of a parliament would be the surest way to enosis in the long run. A deal was in sight. But he had one more advisor to consult. Under the pretext of ordaining a priest, he traveled into the mountains to meet Grivas. Makarios had brought him to Cyprus, but Aoka fighters were now heroes, and Aoka weapons, bought with the church's money, were in Grivas's hands. Could Makarios persuade him to lay them down? They met at Kiko Monastery, their last meeting during the struggle. Grivas's men stood guard outside.
Θυμάσαι που πήγαμε στο μοναστήρι, είδαμε τον Μακάριο.
Ύστερα είδαμε.
Ναι.
Την άλλη μέρα που κατέβηκαμε, που ξυπνήσαμε, μας κάλεσαν όλους κοντά του και μας λέει μπορεί να κατεβούμε κάτω. Θα σας δούμε διότι θα έρθει συμφωνία. Είναι συμφωνία Χάρτιν Μακαρίου και να τη ετοιμαστούμε. Στάμε τις βαλίτσες μας, αστιεύκαμε και δέχτηκε να βγάλουμε φωτογραφίες. Πώς να δέχεται να βγάλουμε φωτογραφίες. Και ο κύριος Πολυβής με έναν άλλον το Φρίλαν ήταν ειδικοί για τις... είχαν και φωτογραφική μηχανή και βγάλαμε μαζί όλοι οι φωτογραφίες, ενθύμιο.
Grivas broke his iron rule of secrecy in permitting this photograph to be taken, because the struggle would soon be over. Makarios left the mountain meeting believing he had cleared the final obstacle to agreement. Grievous announced a ceasefire a few days later to allow Makarios to settle. But the Archbishop had promised Grievous he would secure some conditions.
Grievous told Makarios that I don't trust the British. And his opinion was that if we are given amnesty, if we are given the police security, then we could sign an agreement.
Makarios wrote to Harding agreeing to renounce violence if these few small details could just be settled first.
As far as I was concerned, it was no good continuing the negotiations. We'd come to a dead end. And so I recommended to the Colonial Secretary that he should come out.
To the British, these fresh demands raised after 5 months of talks showed that Makarios was not negotiating in good faith. Makarios had high hopes of new concessions from the Colonial Secretary, Alan Lennox Boyd. He, however, thought the terms Harding had already offered were sufficient to impress the world and the House of Commons.
Lennox Boyd read a statement immediately saying that this I'm going to tell in the House. Still, 3 points were pending: the amnesty, the public security, and the majority in the House. So the Archbishop wanted to clarify those 3 questions. And Lennox Boyd said immediately, no, accept it or not. I didn't come here to negotiate. You have already negotiated to the government. The Archbishop insisted and said, well, let's talk about this subject. Why not?
I think the truth is that ministers in London and perhaps the governor in Cyprus also had been becoming increasingly exasperated at what they saw as the prevarication of the Archbishop as the talks wore on, and increasingly disillusioned about the possibility of ever reaching a viable political settlement with him. Must remember that at that time, too, the information was beginning to accumulate about the Archbishop's own involvement in the Ioka campaign.
Lennox Boyd was adamant. He said, no, receive it or not. And the Archbishop said, well, under these conditions, I'm not going to accept it. And then Lennox Boyd stood up. He was 2 meters tall, you know. He closed his file and he said, addressing to the Archbishop, he said, Archbishop, God save your people. And he left.
Makarios had held out too long. The only terms ever offered the Cypriots, which could have led to enosis, were withdrawn.
Had Makarios accepted them, I think we would have been in a very difficult position. Because that, although it ruled out enosis, immediate enosis, it left the door open. Let's see what will happen in 10 years' time and that sort of thing. Anyway, Makarios, much to our content, refused them.
So I said to Lennox Boyd, I told Lennox Boyd that in my opinion the only thing to be done then was for me to concentrate on inflicting a defeat on Ioka. If that was done, if that was to be the program, well then I must get Makarios out of the way.
Makarios left for the airport to fly to Athens for consultations about his next move. His old friend Papastavros was taking his afternoon nap. He was awakened by 2 policemen and driven off.
Βλέπω να στρέφονται αριστερά προς το αεροδρόμιο. Λέω, πού πάμε να ράγει, είναι άλλα, εδώ, κρατητήρια. Οπότε κάποια στιγμή είχαμε σταματήσει. Ούτε οι αστυνομικοί δεν ήξερα. Μόνο ο οδηγός του αυτοκινήτου ήξερε. Κάτω μου λένε. Κατέβηκα από το αυτοκίνητο. Προχώρα. Απέναντι ήταν ένα αεροπλάνο της αυτής μεγαλειότητας. Αγγλικό αεροπλάνο. Προχώρησα λοιπόν, κατάλαβα ότι, λέω, μας διώχνουν. Μόλις ανέβηκα πάνω στο αεροπλάνο, είχα δει μέσα τον μακαριότατο, τον Μακάριο. Βρε πώς τα κατάφερες, μου λέει, και ήρθες εδώ. Αυτός είχε πιστέψει ότι εγώ κατόρθωσα να διασπάσω τον κλειόν και να πάω να δω αν θέλει τίποτα. Λέω, δεν τα κατόρθωσα, να έρθω, με έφερα. Χαμογέλασε και μου λέει, πάμε, λέει, εξορία. Λέω, ο Θεός μαζί μας.
Και εγώ βάζω το ράδιο, ένα ράδιο, και εγώ άκουσα τα νέα πρώτα. Λέω του αρχέλα του διώξει τον Μακάριο. Και ο Μακάριος, και δηλαδή μου διγενείς, τώρα θα αρχίσει ο αγώνα, λέει. Διότι είναι λάθος τους Εγγλέζους που διώξαν τον Μακάριο και τους άλλους. Θα αναστατώσουν τον λαό και θα είναι πιο ενωμένος και ωραίος. Και τώρα θα αρχίσει πραγματικά ο αγώνας.
They accepted me as a member of IOCA. I'm able to kill the governor. I had no plan how to kill him. Maybe to by knife or by pistol. I had no idea about this.
This program tells how the conflict, which has torn the island of Cyprus apart, was unleashed during the last years of British rule. Years ago, Britain faced a rebellion. Archbishop Makarios led the Greek people of Cyprus demanding enosis, union with Greece. Britain's Prime Minister had called in her top soldier, Field Marshal Sir John Harding. He sent him as governor to break the Cypriot terrorist group AOCA.
I've been given the task of restoring law and order and putting an end to terrorism and intimidation. I believe that it can be done. I intend to do it.
On the 9th of March 1956, the governor deported Archbishop Makarios. AOCA immediately ordered a young waiter in Government House to put into effect a plan to kill the governor. He was given a time bomb, which he smuggled past the governor's tight security, strapped to his stomach with a lady's corset, borrowed from one of AOCA's women couriers.
I get immediately to the bedroom of the governor. I closed the door, and immediately I took the bomb out of my corset, and I put it in the mattress under the bed. You see, they were sleeping on separate beds. They were nearby the beds, but they were separate, two beds, you know. And closed the beds, just to kill both of them. Not to have her to cry after him, you know. I went down, and we served the governor. I was thinking that it was the last lunch he had in Cyprus, because he was going to die, you know.
I always get up very late, I'm sorry to say, in the morning, and I had only just got up and nobody had done the room or made the bed or anything. And one of the soldiers came in, opened the doors between the bedrooms and said, "There's a bomb in His Excellency's bed." And I said, "Oh, don't be silly, of course there can't be. He was sleeping on it. We had twin beds pushed up together." I said, "He was sleeping on it all night." And so he said, "There is. You better come and have a look at it." So I went and looked, and there was this thing, I'd never seen a bomb before, but there was this bomb there, and I very nearly touched it with flicked it with my fingers, and I said, well, it must be a dud, because it was there all night. A young officer who was very brave put the bomb on a shovel. He'd walked right through Government House, which was quite big, and he'd put it in a sandbag pit, and it was striking 12, and it went off 3 minutes after he'd put it in, with the most sickening explosion that broke all the windows outside of the house.
I put the radio on, and I was waiting to hear the news. And the radio said that His Excellency the Governor visited Famagusta. I said, good, my God, he's alive, I said.
Nephatos Sophocleos became a wanted man and was taken to the mountains to join the guerrilla bands under the Iauka commander, Colonel George Grivas. It was he who had ordered the governor's assassination. The governor was determined to catch Grivas. He had been promised all the troops and equipment he asked for. In June 1956, he got very close.
The anti-terrorist campaign in Cyprus reaches a new stage with the combing of 400 square miles of mountain forests in the southwest of the island. Mortars are used for the first time in the Cyprus emergency as British troops draw the net tighter around Iauka's hideouts. Somewhere in the thick forest in front of them are Iauka leaders with a big price on their heads, including, it is believed, the chief of them all, George Grivas.
The British troops pressed hard on the heels of Grivas. One patrol even came upon him washing. He fled, leaving his diary and his cardigan and spectacles behind. The Iauka chief just managed to slip through the closing net at night. For the next 2.5 years, he directed his war against the British from this house on the outskirts of the town of Limassol. He never moved beyond its garden. Not even his own area commanders knew where he was. Inside, under the kitchen sink, was the entrance to a cleverly constructed hideout into which he descended to sleep and take refuge when outsiders were near. Though cut off from his men, he did not relax his iron grip on the organization. From here, his orders, written on tightly folded scraps of paper, were taken by trusted women couriers to his execution squads in the towns.
Metaxa Square, Nicosia, and a surprise swoop by men of the 3rd Parachute Battalion searching for concealed weapons. The day before, in a nearby street, 2 Royal Air Force men were brutally murdered and one seriously wounded by terrorists.
They use, not all the time, but most of the times, the women, because when they shoot a person or a traitor, the men, they gave the pistols to the women that they were somewhere near. And so when the British soldiers searched the boys, they didn't find the pistols because we had.
One of the men died inside this barber's shop. The body of his comrade lies nearby. The men, wearing civilian clothes, were shot from behind in cold blood.
They went in for a murder of the odd policeman and the soldier. You get a couple of policemen walking down on a patrol in Nicosia, and they would, like it's not, one of them get shot in the back.
If they give me the guns, if they give us the guns, the armored cars, and everything that they got, we can fight face to face. I mean, we feel brave, as they are, I mean, at that time. But they got everything on their side, and they wanted us, I mean, to come and fight with them face by face. How we can fight face by face.
A search was started immediately while the scent was still fresh, but no trace was found. The town is now out of bounds to servicemen off duty.
When you took the guns, where did you put them?
On me, in my back or my belt, or in our breast. It was a safe way, we thought, at that time.
And that we found was a very difficult problem. And they had some successes that way, if you call murder being successful.
Harding's first problem was to get the information to find Iauka. The killers melted into the population, who were afraid to talk. They knew what Iauka would do to a traitor.
He revealed to the enemy the hideout I was living, and I decided and I executed him.
What did you say to him?
Nothing.
What happened?
I didn't go by myself personally. I sent some boys to kill him. He was shot in the head, dead. No explanation, no messing, no... If you're a traitor, you have to die. That's all. It was clear to all of us.
Why didn't he try to escape?
To go where? To go where? Nobody would help him. Since you are a traitor, either you have to commit suicide or Eoka will kill you.
Of course, I cannot say but night that for sure that all these people that we killed, they were, be traitors. Some of them maybe not purposely, but because they speak a lot.
Sometimes hear of people say, of course, I loathe the brutal methods of Eoka, but at least they are effective towards achieving their ends. How wrong they are. Eoka are a small minority, trying to force their views and opinions on all the peoples of Cyprus by fear and bloodshed. It is Eoka which is preventing you, the people of Cyprus, from governing yourselves.
Harding set out to crush Eoka. He believed that when he had freed the Cypriots from the terrorist threat, new moderate leaders would come forward to help him govern Cyprus. Harding's first step was to strengthen the police, now thoroughly infiltrated by Eoka. He created an auxiliary police force recruited from the 20% minority of the population, the Turkish Cypriots.
We were against Eoka. Britain was against Eoka. Therefore, we had a joint interest in seeing that Eoka did not succeed.
The only thing on which I insisted very strongly with Marshal Harding was that the auxiliary police would bring about very serious frictions between the Greek majority and the Turkish minority, and then create a situation which would be absolutely insoluble because of the strifes which would occur between Greeks and Turks.
We couldn't bring a whole horde of policemen from elsewhere in to do duties of that kind. And so really we had no choice in the matter.
Eoka began its struggle against the British, not the Turkish Cypriots. But as Turks became Britain's law enforcers, they too became Eoka targets. Some said it was deliberate British policy to set Greek against Turk and divide and rule.
I don't think that it's fair to read great political significance into the action. It was simply a normal part of the security operation. Certainly it's true that perhaps as we were forced to rely more and more on the Turkish Cypriots, it became more and more important that we shouldn't alienate them. We simply couldn't afford, of course, to fight a battle here in Cyprus on both fronts against both Greeks and Turks.
Harding introduced tough emergency laws. He punished whole villages with collective fines and curfews for protecting Eoka men. To the Cypriots, it seemed like the end of British justice, which they had enjoyed for more than 70 years. Troops and police rounded up suspect after suspect. Thousands were detained without trial, some for months. But suspects had to be made to talk.
They took me to the special branch. They took off all my clothes. They tied me by the back, my hands and back, my foot, and they beat me for a lot. Then they asked, somebody came, I mean a Cypriot came, a Cypriot officer who started beating me. He was always either drunk or taking drugs. He was really mad with me. He was crying one time, he was laughing the other time. I mean, he was a man unbalanced. He was taking a stick to put in my bottom. He was taking some cloth, put in the water, and then put it in my face so that not to breathe. He threw me down and he started dancing on my stomach with. He was wearing boots.
Nikos Koshis described 12 days of torture before interrogators abandoned efforts to make him talk. Many Cypriots made similar allegations of torture by the British and those who worked for them. Athens radio broadcast every charge. And in the House of Commons, the Labour Party asked, if Harding's hands were clean, why didn't he hold a public inquiry?
I had sufficient confidence in my senior police officers and army commanders to accept their view that this didn't happen. And so I was not prepared to run the risk of damage. A very serious damage could have been caused to the morale and confidence of the troops and the police, and particularly the police, by public, it's all so-called public inquiry, which very seldom, in my experience, gets at the real truth.
Harding believed he had a far more effective means of getting Cypriots to talk. In November 1956, he brought in the death penalty for anyone caught with a weapon. 8 Aoka men had been found guilty by the courts and hanged for murder. Now, not only convicted killers, but also the women who took their guns and sped their getaway could hang. Although only one youth was hanged for this offence, with the threat, interrogators could bargain with suspects for information or their lives.
And you've always got a balance of fear in the terrorist's mind between what will happen to him if he defects or if he gives information from his own terrorist organization, and Grievous was particularly ruthless in that respect, on the one hand, and the fear of punishment through the courts on the other hand.
Early in 1957, Harding started to get information and pull in the Aoka men. Hooded informers led British soldiers to Aoka hideouts. Leader after leader was surrounded and captured. Grievous' second in command, Gregoris Avsentiu, told his men that he would not surrender. To restore the people's faith in Aoka, someone must fight to the death. High in the Troodos Mountains was the hideout used by Avsentiu and his 4 guerrillas. A cave whose entrance was cleverly concealed in the hillside. On the 3rd of March 1957, it was discovered by British soldiers. So confident were the British that they invited newsreel cameras to film this important capture.
It was morning, about 6 o'clock, from the movement of the troops, British troops, and from the noise of the helicopter, we suspected that our cave must be betrayed.
The British shouted to the guerrillas to surrender. Matrosos and the men came out and gave themselves up, but their leader stayed put. When a British corporal ordered him out, Avsentiu shot him dead. The British threw a grenade into the cave and forced Matrosos back in to bring out the body. But he found Avsentiu was still alive and joined him.
I enter in. I took the Tommy gun. I came out of the cave close. I shoot some bullets, and I said, now we are two. Come to catch us if you can. And we start the battle.
As the captured Aoka men watched, the British threw all they had, tear gas, boulders, and explosives, at the cave. The battle raged for 6 hours.
Sometimes I was ready to die. I didn't afraid from death. Sometimes I was thinking about life.
With the press looking on, British patience came to an end.
And then I smelled it was petrol. I said, oh my God, master, is petrol.
The British set the petrol alight.
I was in front of the exit. The flame took me from the face. Instantly, I cover my face, my eyes, and my hands also burn. I feel them burn. Then again, the Avxantiu, I saw him in flames, and he shouted me, "Don't be afraid." It was the last word I heard from Avxantiu. I jump out of the cave with hope that a bullet will, somebody will shoot me. I didn't want to live, and I didn't want to die by flames.
Matrosos was found lying stunned at the bottom of the hill.
They removed some stones from the roof, and I saw Avxantiu was burnt.
How did you feel about him?
Well, he was, from my side, a great respect. He was a man who was training us to love our country, to love our freedom. He was a brave man.
The struggle had found its martyr. Though Aeoka's mountain gangs were now destroyed, the Greek Cypriot people were inspired with the will to carry on.
I don't believe myself that you can destroy an organization of that kind, which is led by fanatics and has a great deal of support from the civil population, either from sympathy or from fear. I don't think you can destroy it, but we had inflicted a very serious defeat on them.
10 days after the battle, Grivas offered a truce if the British would release Archbishop Makarios from his exile in the Seychelles. Harding's forces were now in command, but a year had elapsed since the Archbishop's deportation, and still no new leader had come forward to speak for the Greek Cypriots. If the British wanted to negotiate, they would have to bring Makarios back. But the diaries which Grivas had left behind in the mountains had proved that the Archbishop was behind Aeoka violence. So before releasing him, the British laid down one condition.
On Archbishop Makarios, why isn't it possible to release him immediately? Well, the simple reason, he's got a great deal of influence, and if he renounces violence, it'll help to bring violence to an end. Until he does that and makes a clear statement saying violence should cease, I don't believe any responsible government could allow him out of his place of detention.
Archbishop Makarios, leader of the Greeks in Cyprus, was released from detention in the Seychelles. He was now free to go anywhere, except home to Cyprus. He arrived in Athens on the 17th of April, 1957. Makarios had failed to make a clear statement renouncing Aeoka violence. The British government, in releasing him anyway, had taken a gamble. They waited to see if it would pay off. Would Makarios make some gesture to change the uneasy truce in Cyprus into a lasting peace?
The very day he arrived, he received an enthusiastic reception from the whole population of Athens, and he met Prime Minister Karamanlis the same afternoon. And then he came to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I insisted very much to Makarios that the action of Grivas and Aeoka should reach an end.
The Greek consul argued that Aeoka was now fighting the wrong enemy. The real barrier to Cyprus joining Greece was no longer Britain, but Cyprus's nearest neighbor, Turkey. Makarios' release had alarmed the Turks. They were now helping the Turkish Cypriots to arm themselves. Makarios was warned he must stop Aeoka now, before the Greek and Turkish Cypriots began to fight each other. Makarios seemed convinced.
he said that he was absolutely in agreement, but making a gesture towards the direction of Cyprus. He said, but he will have to take also part of his responsibility, of course, meaning Grivas.
Makarios himself had appointed Eocha's leader, but he feared that during his exile, Grivas's grip on the island had tightened. The Greek consul returned to Cyprus with a letter from the archbishop in the diplomatic bag. It did not order Grivas to stop the war, but merely asked for his opinion. Grivas replied,
I do not know what information you have been given by the self-appointed advisors who have rushed to Athens to gain your ears and surround you with the poison of the towns. A permanent ceasefire is unthinkable.
Makarios backed down. Grivas stayed in Cyprus.
I can't say Grivas was controlling him, but Makarios was afraid to come to a clash with him. I think that this is my impression. Makarios was a very clever man, but I don't think that he had the power, the bravery, I would say, to confront with public opinion.
Britain at this moment was reeling from a blow which changed her attitude to Cyprus and her whole empire. The attempt to reconquer the Suez Canal had ended in disaster. Sir Anthony Eden, the Prime Minister who had said Britain could never leave Cyprus, had been forced to resign. His successor, Harold Macmillan, though an imperialist in style, was a realist in practice and cut back the imperial role. All of Cyprus was no longer needed. A small base would do. Macmillan wanted to get out. But he could not just pull out and leave Cyprus to the Greeks, as Makarios continued to demand. Turkey, Britain's ally when she wanted to stay, had become another nuisance. Now she was keen to go.
The Turks did become more of a nuisance than a nuisance value. Their nuisance value had been of considerable use to us, and we had been able to capitalize on it in the United Nations and in the International Conference in 55. But when the Turks began to see weakening where there was no weakening on the part of the British government, it then dawned on one or two people in London that perhaps it wasn't all that useful to have the Turks quite so heated on the subject as they had become.
So the colonial secretary had gone to Ankara to show the Turkish government there was another way to protect their interests when the British pulled out.
And when that happened, the Turks in Cyprus would be as entitled as the Greeks in Cyprus to have their own self-determination, and that, of course, involves would it then involve the partition of the island.
The British offered to divide the island in two. If Greek Cypriots voted to join Greece, Turkish Cypriots could join with Turkey. The cause of Taksim, partition, was to seize the imagination of the Turkish crowds.
I remember maps drawn in blood with the Turkish flag on top of it. Partition became the cause célèbre, as they say at the time. Partition or death became the slogan.
Partition to the Greeks meant half a Greek island would be in Turkish hands. Macmillan hoped this threat would make Makarios see reason. But Makarios found another hope, the Labour Party.
But it's more than the Tories have ever dreamed of doing.
Barbara Castle, speaking for the party's executive, pledged that the next Labour government would grant self-determination to Cyprus. With Labour ahead in the polls and an election coming, Macmillan feared that Makarios would just sit tight and wait for Labour to win power.
Do you plan to go to London? Oh, yes, I am planning to go to London, but I didn't decide the time of going to London.
Makarios had refused even to come to talks if Turks were represented. British ministers were becoming desperate. Macmillan wrote in his diary, "It really is one of the most baffling problems I can remember. He searched for a way to get the confidence of the Labour Party and the Greeks. The idea he hit upon was a new governor, not another soldier, but a conciliator, Sir Hugh Foote, Michael Foote's brother, and a known friend of the Greeks.
On taking up his appointment as governor 4 weeks ago, Sir Hugh was asked to make his report on the troubled island. Since then, at great personal risk, he has toured Greek and Turkish villages, seeking the views of the people themselves.
I said at the time I was rather pleased with myself. Things had gone rather well. I got a good deal of publicity from these acts. No great substance perhaps in them, but they were indications of an anxious anxiety to work with the people. And then the terrible consequence.
Foote's friendly gestures to the Greeks only convinced the Turkish Cypriots their protectors had abandoned them. Tension mounted. On the night of the 7th of June, 1958, the tension suddenly snapped. Cyprus has never recovered from that night.
There was an explosion at the information bureau of the Turkish consulate. A crowd had already gathered there, a crowd of Turkish Cypriot youth. And they all almost immediately decided that Greeks had done it. And they were swearing vengeance against the Greeks and so on.
The explosion started a night of rioting in Nicosia. Turkish Cypriots burned and looted Greek shops and homes. Soon Aoka counterattacked, and the fighting spread round the island. Greek and Turkish families, who had always lived as neighbors, now moved with all their possessions into separate areas. British soldiers put up barricades to keep the two communities apart. Partition was fast becoming a reality. For 3 years, two armies had been fighting a war. Now, ordinary people were being killed merely because they were Greeks or Turks.
Later on, a friend of mine, whose name will still be kept a secret, was to confess to me that he had put this little bomb in that doorway in order to create an atmosphere of tension so that people would know that Turkish Cypriots mattered.
The fighting raged for 3 months. More than 100 were killed.
Mr. Macmillan was passing through Nicosia airport. I had some talk with him and told him all the terrible circumstances we faced. He said, well, if it's as bad as that, I think I'll have to have a hand in this myself.
Foote helped Macmillan devise an ingenious scheme to force Makarios and the Greeks to compromise.
I've had talks today with the Greek Cypriot leaders, the mayor of Nicosia and the mayor of Kyrenia. I've also had talks with the two Turkish leaders. The task which the British government has set itself is to see whether we could bring about at least some temporary period of calm and peace in the island. That means a great effort by all concerned.
Macmillan offered to share the governing of Cyprus with Greece and Turkey. On the surface, a generous and even-handed offer. But to the Greeks, to have Turkey installed as one of the rulers of the island they claimed was part of Greece was a nightmare come true.
The Greek people of Cyprus will oppose by all means the unilateral application of this plan. If the British government insists on its plan, the result will be disastrous.
Makarios had opposed Britain's plans before, but the Macmillan plan had an important difference.
This time it wasn't a question of going to beg them in Athens and Greece. The idea was now we should go and tell them that we're going ahead with this. You've got to accommodate yourself to it. I think that made a main difference.
Macmillan told the Greeks that even if they refused to participate, He would impose the plan in 2 months' time, if necessary, with the Turks alone.
One of the best Cypriots I knew, Mr. Pascalidis, came into my office and he crossed his hands on his breast and he said in Greek, "Teteleste," which means it is finished. It is the last words which our Lord murmured on the cross. That is, that everything has come to an end.
In desperation, Makarios turned to his last allies in Britain, the Labour Party. He asked Barbara Castle to Athens to see if Labour still stood by its promise to grant union with Greece. She brought bad news. As Macmillan hoped, Sir Hugh Foote was bringing the Labour Party round. Unless Makarios compromised, they too would back the Macmillan plan. For the cause of Enosis, Makarios had led his people into war and suffered exile. Now, he decided that the only way to stop the Macmillan plan was to abandon Enosis.
Oh, he's prepared to make a very important change indeed. He has offered to accept the status of independence for Cyprus on condition that Cyprus shall not be linked either with Turkey or with Greece. In other words, he says, rule out partition and rule out union with Greece and let Cyprus be an independent state whose new position shall be guaranteed by the United Nations. Now, this is a very hopeful new development and offers a way out of the present deadlock.
We were terribly astonished when, out of the blue, one day, Barbara Castle, who was a noblewoman, came out and said, "Makarios has proposed me independence." We remained completely astonished, because this was something that, treated diplomatically, could lead to many things. Because we are convinced that if we could approach secretly or the Turks or the British, tell them about independence, let's try, we shall convince Makarios, we could find terms which would be very favorable. And we lost this arm because Makarios came out and declared that he's ready to accept it.
Grivas, too, had not been consulted. 2 days after the Archbishop's concession, he issued this order. For over a year, he had kept Aoka on a tight rein. Now he told them to strike against the English. Soldiers and civilians alike, all except children, were targets. And that included women.
It was here in Famagusta that the most brutal outrage of all outrages in Cyprus took place. 2 British women deliberately shot in the back. Mrs. Cutliff died at once, and Mrs. Robinson was gravely wounded. Both were wives of servicemen. An intensive search for the murderers began at once. It would be surprising indeed if the troops, naturally enraged by this cold-blooded act of Aoka thugs, had carried out their search and made their arrests with kid-glove methods. All must surely have felt that this was the most poignant of the many tragedies of the tragic situation in Cyprus.
When Makarios got the news that there was that killing, he was more than furious. He shouted and he said, now what do we do? Go around and kill ladies? And he was very, shall I say, rude in his expressions. And it is the only time in my life I've seen him not to control himself.
World opinion was so outraged that Grivas denied responsibility. But Aoka resumed the killing of British servicemen. For Britain, it seemed to be starting all over again, only worse. She pressed on with the Macmillan plan, and Greece and Turkey were at loggerheads. Cyprus seemed to be dragging them towards war. They clashed at the United Nations. Greek Foreign Minister Averov proposed independence for Cyprus, his last chance to ward off the Macmillan plan and keep Turkey out. Turkish Foreign Minister Zorlu backed the Macmillan plan, which he saw as the path to partition.
In fact, on Cyprus, there are 2 national communities.
He rejected independence as a Greek ruse to grab Cyprus.
La Grèce n'a jamais nourri de projets expansionnistes à Chypre.
At the end of a grueling debate, the Turks carried the day. Averov's last hope of keeping Turkey out of Cyprus was dashed.
We went with some members of the delegation at the end of the corridor to smoke. And we were frantic, of course, desperate. Because there are also questions of internal policy. How do you go back in the country, beaten in an international forum? Then I saw Zorlu coming towards me. I told my people there, he's coming here. I'm afraid I'll slap him in the face. I'm so nervous, I don't think I will be able to keep my nerve. So he came smiling, and he told me, I came to congratulate you.
To Averov's amazement, Zorlu not only praised his speeches, but made a proposal that was to change the history of Cyprus. If the two of them could work together, he would offer a way out of the problem.
And we were waiting there anxiously. And Zorlu came back, beaming, saying, I think we've seen the end of the tunnel. We'll work for independence together.
On a scrap of paper, the two men jotted down the basis of a deal. Zorlu agreed to independence for Cyprus, but with firm guarantees for the Turkish minority. Over the next few weeks, they slipped out of international meetings to thrash out the details of their plan. The British Foreign Secretary was heard to ask just when they'd let him know the fate in store for this still British colony. 2 months later, at Zurich, their prime ministers met and approved the deal.
Mr. Zorlu, as Turkish Foreign Minister, are you happy with the agreement you've reached with Greece?
I am completely happy.
Why has it taken so long and cost so many lives before this agreement was reached?
This is a difficult question because the matter was a very complicated one, and the national pride and too much emotion was involved in this dispute.
Are you confident that it will be acceptable to the Turkish Cypriots?
We are sure of it.
The Greeks were less certain.
It needs, first of all, the approval of the British government, who has the sovereignty on the island, and also it needs the consensus of the people of Cyprus, and when I say the people, I mean all the people, all the parts of it.
Are you convinced that it will receive these two agreements?
In politics, nobody can be convinced, but I would say I'm very hopeful.
Averov and Zorlu flew straight to London and found the British delighted with any solution which let Britain escape from Cyprus and hang on to 2 military bases. The British Foreign Secretary, Selwyn Lloyd, agreed to invite the Greek and Turkish Cypriots to a conference in London. The Turkish Cypriots also were delighted. The deal gave generous minority rights, guaranteed by a contingent of Turkish troops on the island.
Would you object to Makarios being the new president of the new Cyprus?
Well, I don't think it is for us to object. If the Greek community want him as a president, they can have him. We shall have our vice president in charge of our own communal affairs.
And you think it'll work all right?
Well, with goodwill on both sides, we don't see why it shouldn't work.
The British were more wary of Makarios. They had made one firm condition. The conference was to be only a signing ceremony. Details agreed in Zurich could not be changed. Makarios had promised Greek Prime Minister Karamanlis that he would accept the deal. But he invited 35 prominent Cypriots to London to join him. On the eve of the conference, he went to meet them to reveal the contents of the Zurich Agreement.
2 things became very obvious. The one, that it was not a question of a gnosis, and the other, that it was a question of a constitution which gave far too many rights to the minority community as we saw it at the time. And therefore, there was a lot of opposition to Makarios signing that agreement.
Outside Lancaster House, even the fog was lifting as Foreign Secretary Selwyn Lloyd arrived for the conference on Cyprus. To the governor of the island, Sir Hugh Foote, it was a near miracle that the hope of peace had dawned at last. Indeed, the presence in London of the much-discussed Archbishop Makarios, now indisputable fact, would have seemed quite out of the question only a week or two ago, yet here he was.
The conference began with each delegate playing his expected role. Selwyn Lloyd read out the Zurich agreements, Averov described them as the best possible, and Zorlu agreed. Then Makarios spoke. He said while he accepted the agreements as a basis, he would like just a few amendments. The conference was stunned. He knew the deal was to be accepted as a package with no amendments. What was he up to? Makarios afterwards told a British minister a story to explain his bargaining tactics. When he was a young monk at Kiko Monastery, the abbot told him he must grow a beard.
Makarios said, "I'm sorry, Father, I don't like beards. I'm not going to grow one." To which the abbot replied, "Well, we'll kick you out and you won't be a priest and you'll go back to your village where you're nobody and nothing. Go to your cell and pack." And Makarios told me this himself. He went to his cell, he had a little cardboard suitcase, and he packed his few belongings. He said, "It's really a test of the abbot's will and mine. He's going to send for the taxi to take me away. I'll let the taxi take me to the gate, and then I'll come back and apologize. And I expect they'll thrash me, but they'll forgive me, and I'll grow a beard and become a priest in the ordinary way. But I reckon he'll give in first."
That time, the abbot did give in first. After the archbishop's bombshell, the conference was adjourned. Averov telephoned Karamanlis in Athens, who flew to London and ordered that Makarios be brought to meet him. He went from the airport to confront Makarios, who said he had promised, but he was sorry he had now changed his mind.
Then Karamanlis told him very calmly, but in a very strong voice, that I want you to know one thing. My policy on Cyprus is fixed. We have monographed these agreements in Zurich. It's finished, that's the agreement. That's my policy. If you don't agree, I will not change my policy. It's fixed. And he left.
The Greeks passed on the warning to Makarios' delegation. If the Cypriots went on fighting, they would now be on their own. Delegation said they would back Makarios, whatever his decision. The conference met for its final session. War or peace in Cyprus hung on Makarios alone.
And Selwyn Lloyd asked Makarios, "What are you going to do, Your Beatitude? Are you going to sign the agreement?" And Makarios said immediately, "If you ask me to give you an answer right now, my answer is no."
Makarios was given one more night to accept the deal. Once before, he'd held out too long with Harding, only to find the offer withdrawn and each later one worse. This time, he had not consulted Grivas. If he was determined to fight on, how many Cypriots would follow him? The taxi had reached the monastery gate. No one had called him back. Was it time to give in?
And that was the most critical evening for the Archbishop. I remember I went to his room and I stayed with him until midnight. And I remember Archbishop was smoking. He was a heavy smoker, smoking and thinking. I told him good night and have a good sleep. And he told me, "I wonder if I can sleep this evening." So next morning I went first and knocked his door, and he said, "I have already given my answer. I have contacted the Greek representatives and I told them that I will sign." That was the story.
This day, a new chapter opens up for the people of Cyprus, a period of peace and prosperity and freedom. The two communities in the island working closely together with God's guidance, will, I have no doubt, be able to develop the welfare of the island to their common benefit.
The Cypriots' armed struggle was entirely successful in the military sphere, as history will pronounce one day. However, its accomplishments were not duly exploited by the political leadership.
Grivas did not dare risk a clash with Makarios. He reluctantly ordered his fighters to lay down their arms. He went home to Greece, but he was to return later to plague Makarios. The Archbishop took over the government as President of the Independent Republic of Cyprus.
After the end of the war? Oh, yeah. I came here just to take my belongings, you know. Before I telephoned to the ADC and I asked him to give me my salary. He said, "Are you crazy?" he said. And I told him that if he denied to give my salary, I blow him up. He said, "Come on, the government house belongs to you now," he said.
Makarios did not succeed in closing the rift between the two communities. In 1974, after the dictators then in power in Greece had tried to annex the island, Turkey invaded. Today, Cyprus is partitioned.
Channel 4 and me, Veronica Hicks. See you tomorrow.